Thank you. Welcome back. We haven't lost too many to the sunshine in Lincoln's Inn Fields. Welcome to this session. It's going to be very much, we hope, an interactive session. I'm David Brindle. I'm from the Guardian newspaper. I also sit on the advisory board for the SSCR. And in this session, we're continuing very much the theme of the day, which is building that evidence base, that's much needed evidence base for social care, and critically applying that research in practice. And we're talking very much here about KEI, which, as you all know, is knowledge exchange and impact, but really focusing on what we've achieved, what progress we've made, rather than going over some of the well-rehearsed issues about it. So we're going to be looking at what we've learnt or not in terms of evaluating impact in social care. You'd have heard Chris Whitty this morning talking about his 3 key tests for good social care research. 1, that it was well targeted, 2, that it was rigorous, and 3, that it had impact. And we equally heard Lynn Romeo almost pleading with us to arm her with a better research evidence base to take into those discussions in the Department of Health, in government, on issues like the case for giving a named social worker for every individual with a learning disability. So as I say, this is going to be very much a discussion session, but we're going to kick off with a brief prompt just to get the juices flowing from Angie Mehta, who is, as I'm sure you know, Finance and Impact Manager here at SSCR, and then we'll flow into discussion. Angie.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. I was hoping the room would be empty, but now that you're all here. So this talk covers what we've learned or not from evaluating impact in social care. So SSCR, we haven't gone out and completely evaluated it. We're just trying to see how we can show that we've had impact. And just realising the value of SSCR and improving knowledge exchange and impact. I wanted to put celebrating, but it seemed it was too early to do that. So we're focusing on achievements and progress, or at least trying to, and hopefully getting the conversation started. I'm just going to say a bit about me, and this is the only slide anywhere in the land where you'll find me talking about myself. So I've been with SSCR since it started in 2009. In phase 1, I was Finances and Communications Manager, and in phase 2, that became Finance and Impact Manager. And with any luck in phase 3, no one will need a communication or impact manager because the projects will do it all themselves. I also work in LSC as PSIU manager and do a bit around knowledge exchange and impact there. We started probably around 2004 and we were focusing on dissemination and just getting stuff out there. And we moved on to communications and knowledge exchange and then knowledge transfer, then knowledge exchange, and we're doing impact. And we've had working groups that have started with being called a dissemination group, and then they sort of just kept growing. And over the last 6-7 years, I've been doing some small-scale research projects around knowledge exchange and impact, partly just to see if we can find out what works and then apply it for PSIU and SSCR. And then just looking at some of the other end of things around the types of knowledge used in decision-making in social care practice and what that means for the use of research evidence. So the first things first, we can't start an impact session without defining impact. There's probably a huge amount of definitions of impact out there, and the easiest one for us has always been the Hefke one, where impact is the effect on change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, etc., beyond academia. With REF, it's always been outside of academia. And that includes the reduction of prevention of harm, risk, cost, and other negative effects. So one of the things we just wanted to ask you is, having, and you've probably come across multiple definitions of impact yourselves, what does that mean to you? What does impact mean to you? And where would you place yourself on a kind of rate, what do you call it? That's it, spectrum of impact. So would you say that you're more, you know about impact, you know what you're doing, you're on your way to doing it. You know about impact, you're probably struggling with it, but you'll get there. Or you just have no idea what you're doing or how to do it. And that could be from the professional side or the practice or the research side. So we're just going to force you to stand up. So if you think you know about impact, you know what you're doing, and you're kind of on your way to doing it, stand up. Okay, that's good. Thank you. I was about to say, there's got to be a female that gets up. If you're sort of in the middle, so you kind of know, you've heard about impact, you know your way around it, but you're probably still struggling with that. Many more. Thank you. And so you're on the kind of negative side, you have no idea what you're doing, you don't know where to start, and you'd really like someone to help you.
Somebody had to.
Well, that's good. There's lots of people in the middle. Slightly worried that people are struggling with it, but there's lots of people in the middle, and there's some great experts in the room, so it would make for good discussion. We're just going to take an example. So I'm sure you've all come across the Whole Systems Demonstrators project and Telecare. And so the findings from Telecare in one line said that they're not cost effective for people using social care. Do you think, and this is just up for discussion, so shout out, do you think that project had impact?
No.
I didn't see who said that, but, oh, I know it was John, wasn't it? Why not?
I'm not actually, in saying no, I'm not actually referring to the evidence, it's just my opinion. But it just seemed very odd that an extremely well put together clinical trial, which cost multi-millions of pounds, and said that Telecare doesn't work, didn't seem to make any difference to investment decisions being made by local authorities, even though they were facing and continue to face unprecedented austerity. It was a puzzle to me.
Okay, so the impact for you would have been the change with people not investing the money anymore because the evidence said it wasn't worth
I think
doing.
the problem with the trial was that, and it's where I'm trying to pick up, is that it didn't really go further than saying it doesn't work. It didn't really explore why it's not working.
Okay.
And given the higher levels of investment that have already been made into the care and the current Department of Health policies, very unlikely that local authorities are going to step back and say, oh gosh, you put us bang to rights, we better not spend any more money on Telecare. Of course they're not going to do that. With hindsight, maybe the Whole System Demonstrator should have gone a little bit further and looked at the reasons for the negative results. But hey, that keeps me in work, so I'm happy.
Okay, but does Margaret?
Well, I would have said that you need to know who you want to have an effect on, where you want the impact to be directed. Because, not particularly speaking about this project, but it might be that the aim of the project is to influence government policy, but then that takes a very long time before it has any effect on the local environment. So I think something around impact is, to me, is, when you were asking have I had impact, any of us have impact, it took me a while to think, well, what impact have I had where, so what role have I had where I think I made an impact. So it took a while. So it's not only have you made impact, but where did you want to make impact? And,
Okay.
then you can sort of unravel it a bit more.
Okay. Is there anyone here, thank you, is there anyone here that disagrees that the WSD project didn't have impact?
Well, sorry if I may, wasn't there a key issue which we haven't mentioned here, that the Prime Minister preempted the findings of the study by declaring it a success while the research was still going on?
Yeah, but that's not unusual, so.
Doesn't that need to be part of our thinking?
Yeah.
It might be.
So what I'm trying to get to is how you think of impact. So for WSD, the suggestion is that it didn't have impact because it didn't then change the way people were implementing the policy or the approach to the policy. But if you looked at on the other end, and John, you said that it led into other projects and more research was funded in the area and more work is being done, would you not see that as an impact? It's had a scientific impact, it's had an impact on research funding. Would you class that as an impact?
It's not academic. It's not outside academia.
Okay. So your definition of impact would be outside of academia. Okay. Josh?
So I'm having a little trouble here because I've spent my career doing policy research, but I would be hard put to find anything that I have done that has had a direct impact on government decisions. But I think, and this may be what this study has done, but what I think some of the projects I have done have sort of reframed the policy discussion and would certainly be something that the perhaps broader media or policy researchers or even government officials would have to be thinking about as they're developing their policies. So, for example, I've done a lot of work on social care financing in the United States, and at least for a period of time, it's now kind of faded away, but I showed that private long-term care insurance wouldn't work. And so that became, at least within the kind of academic policy world, that kind of reframed the discussion. Those studies were long enough ago that the drive for private insurance has come back in the United States, and people have forgotten my research. But it's especially in the United States, which has a much larger universe of people trying to influence policy. It's a pretty high bar to be able to draw a direct line between a study and a government decision.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I should have said at the beginning. Could you say your name before you?
David Cornerstone Ashby. In the work that I've done, one thing that occurs to me, the difference between that and this, is the scale of the work. I looked for the charities that I'm involved in that provide social care. I looked at the way in which our contracts were commissioned. Those largely commissioned by local authorities. And I've always believed that the really sensible thing to do is to try and move up the food chain on that and influence the way in which commissions are structured and then awarded. So one of the things that I was very well aware of was the amount of time that social care workers actually spent on things that really weren't social care at all. They were to do with the system they had to operate in. So it seemed to me that an important part of impact was to look at the amount of time that you freed up in terms of a social care worker to actually spend in one-to-one relationships, actually delivering meaningful social care in a relationship form. Now, I found in that the sensitive use of telecare was enormously effective, but it had to be personalised to the individual. You couldn't just have a pull me down 10 different forms of telecare and apply them across the board. They had to be personalised to individuals. But I measured the impact of that on the amount of time that a social care worker was able to spend in a relationship with the person cared for, and then took that to the commissioning authorities, which were largely local authorities, of course, and persuaded them to include that as a metric within the way that they put out their tenders. Now, that to me is a very valid form of impact, but it's not the same as doing a macro impact assessment of the whole of telecare.
Okay. I think one of the things that does come out in a lot of the discussions around definition of impact is that it varies hugely. And it varies to the extent of what counts as impact and what we would want to count as impact. So unless anyone has any more thoughts on that, I'm going to move on. So
Yeah.
for... Yeah, sorry.
Carl Allen, anything that's a trial, we begin to talk about cost effectiveness. We remove immediately the notion that it's really about learning. So we talk about cost effectiveness and we use that as a metric, and it's not right, because it's far more the cost of learning rather than cost effectiveness of the trial itself. It's only when we go beyond that now we could start to talk about cost effectiveness after the learning.
Okay, thank you. That might be useful to mention to Geraldine when she does her presentation. So for the School for Social Care Research, we've taken the definition that HEFCE have, the impact outside of academia, but for us it's also included scientific impact. And for us it has somewhat, because we're sort of, none of our funders are in this room, but we sort of report to our funders, so some cases it is just horses for horses, whatever fits, whatever we're trying to do is where we would go. But for us, research has always had to include some form of impact or have the potential to include impact. So just a bit about SSCR. I have to apologise for using that picture, it's just the thing that reminds me of SSCR. So we were established in 2009 to develop the evidence base for adult social care practice in England. Since 2009 we've had 30 million, I think Martin mentioned some of this, but we've had 102 research studies, 275 people involved in the school, extensive user carer practitioner involvement, but the bottom line has to be, what difference has it made? What difference has that 30 million investment to those 102, and that's just 102 at the moment, there's 3 more years to go, made to practice? What difference has it made to research? What difference has it made to doing social care research? And we have a range of activities that fit into our mission, and those include commissioning research, providing a focus for social care research within NIH and more strategically, developing methods, building research capacity and improving research awareness, and sort of supporting the generation of impact from findings and supporting wider knowledge exchange activities. And at the end of the day, at the end of each year, we have to report on the impact we've had in each of those. And for us, it's been sort of trying to understand, well, what works, how can we explain the impact we've had in those, or have we had impact in those areas? Embedding what we're learning into our next tranche of work and making sure our projects are achieving impact, and then trying to evidence it. So for SSCR, we've explored different knowledge exchange methods, and we've done that through various projects. And we've set up a social care research impact website which tries to give people, researchers, a range of different knowledge exchange methods that you could use in projects. We've looked at how to assess impact. We've done some work on bibliometrics, and we've done some work on whether it's possible to put an economic value to social care research. We've embedded our learning, so we try and do more detailed feedback to applicants when they're applying for funding. And we've moved from something that in phase 1, which was more ad hoc and experimental and just trying to keep afloat, really, to a more coordinated strategic approach in this phase. And so we're very much about trying to work with projects and try and get projects working, their strategies working, which will then feed into wider SSCR activities. And we've had a greater focus on knowledge exchange activities and processes throughout phase 2 now. We've also started doing assessments, which include an initial impact survey that we did in 2015, and then we're going to try and keep that going annually, having discussions with project teams and principal investigators. So that's just to show that we've kind of, well, I made this diagram for something else and I just like it, so it's up there. But it's just to show that we've sort of tried to take 5 years of learning and develop phase 2 in a way that streamlines some of what we've learned and puts into place different types of processes and strategies that hopefully will help projects achieve impact. And the ambition is that when we get to phase 3, everything will be so embedded that, you know, people will start off thinking impact and then work out what their research project is. And we just want to take a couple of minutes to do a brief exercise which will feed into some of the findings that we have. So one of the things that we get when we look at proposals, and we've just recently looked at 45 and went through all of the information that they provided us, is there's, how to phrase this without being rude to researchers?
Feel free.
There's an approach to the way people approach impact pathway statements where you sort of wonder, how did you even think that was a good idea? So one of the things I just want to run through with you, because I didn't want to put findings up here that made it sound like I was telling researchers off, so I'm going to make you do it for me. Just go through some of these approaches that people tend to mention a lot and see what you think of them as impact tools and whether you think that they generate impact. So the first one we're going to start with at the bottom is advisory groups. Go for it. Advisory groups. A lot of people put advisory groups in their projects. Do you think that those are a good knowledge exchange method? Do they generate impact? Do they have the potential to generate impact?
They can do it tangentially, they're not central to impact.
Okay.
In all.
Okay. Anyone disagree? Agree?
Well, some are actual exchanges, and most of them look like a simple giving.
Okay.
A website is given, a round table discussion, that's an exchange.
Okay. Just focusing on the advisory groups, does anyone else think differently that they have the potential to have impact for the research that's being done?
They have the potential, but it depends on the membership, on their stakeholder representation and engagement. There's all sorts of things that you want to have a sense of.
Okay.
Potential,
But never the intention when you, or in my case, never been my intention that that's the purpose of an advisory group.
Okay. Nick, did you have something?
Just the same thing. I think it depends. You know, it depends on how it's run and the membership of it and lots of other things. I think it has the potential.
Okay. What about videos? There's lots of use of videos now, and do you think those have potential for impact? Maybe a show of hands. Yes, has potential for impact.
Potential.
Yep. And no, doesn't have any potential for impact.
Does it not depend on people's learning styles? And there is a kind of burgeoning body. I don't really know much about this, but you know, some people are quite visual, some people are more auditory, some people are, you know, more, respond better to the written word. And I guess if you really want to make an impact, you want to use all the senses as far as you can in presenting your information,
Okay.
because you will reach different people with different approaches.
Okay. Josh?
Well, it depends on who you're trying to impact. If you're trying to impact the government officially, I don't know that a video makes too much difference. If you're trying to impact how social workers interact with clients, that might have more of an impact because you're trying to, your impact would involve changing behavior of very large numbers of people, and as was indicated, some people have different learning styles, but you know, when I come to a video on a website, I go right by it and I never click on it because it takes too much time.
Okay. Any other thoughts on videos or Twitter even? Quick show of hands. Twitter, yes, no for impact. Yes for impact. No for impact. Who's on Twitter here? That's probably easier. Okay, not too many. A few. So one of the things that which was quite interesting here, was you were then thinking through, well, yes, it could if this happened, or it might work if we had this, and the composition matters. And as an aside, one of the things in proposals when looking at them is that conversation doesn't come through sometimes. And then you sort of wonder, why would you put a video in there? You haven't really thought about it. But that's just another aside, my whinge that I didn't want to put into this. But some of that thinking helps with generating impact, and that's one of the things with SSCR we're trying to do, is to try and give people a range of methods, or at least discuss some of the ideas that they've put into their proposals, and just talk them through whether having a video for older people is the best way of doing things, for example. So what have we learned? This is probably very obvious. It's not easy to have impact, track it or assess it. It originally started with it's very hard to do that, but not easy sounded better. There seems to be some issues around knowing what impact is and means for social care, but then translating that learning into actions for research, which seemed a bit ironic. There are the usual obvious barriers, time lags. The impact takes time, but practice will have moved on, and policy would have moved on, and it's not necessarily the fault of the research that it's not brought out at the same time as that policy is being made. It just takes a bit longer. There are diverse audiences, so we kind of know it's very hard to get research out there just because social care, the sector is quite fragmented. It's hard to kind of target people, but there are ways of doing it, and if you map your audiences, which is one of the things we're trying to get SSCR proposals to do, it becomes a bit easier. It's extremely difficult to go back and find out why a policy intervention was introduced, and we've tried to do this with the economic returns work and track back some of the sort of policies that came about. And 9 times out of 10, as David said, the policy came out before the research came out, but the research was then just put out there as supporting it. And so it's hard to find out how far that research had any impact because you can't really, it's very disjointed. And the other thing the economics returns works found was that there's huge limitations in the data collected within the sector. And for the economic returns work, we need to have data collected on the costs and outcomes of care, and that ties up with a model that assesses the value of the research and then how far that had a difference. But the data is just not collected routinely, and it makes it very difficult for us to then assess impact. And some of this is the usual, so it's not easy to use research or get it used. And some of those barriers are access to evidence, awareness of ongoing research. There's lots of times where people just weren't aware that the research was happening, so they weren't hanging around for the findings. We've come back to this a lot, the research culture within social care and the need for that to develop. I think this came up in Chris Whitty's talk, the value of synthesis of evidence versus findings from one study, and can one study alone have impact? There's been issues brought up about generalizability and translation of findings from one context to another, and how far people in the sector can really understand what do your findings mean for me? And I suppose one of the key obvious things is research isn't the only type of knowledge used. There's a huge amount of knowledge out there, including practitioner, organisational, user carer. And although we want research to be used and we think it should and it will improve services, there's a number of issues why that isn't the case. I don't think we need to go into all of that. So I'm just going to move on to progress, which was why we wanted to be here. So for SSCR, we've made a lot of progress. So we've improved, I think. I'm going to say we've done everything, but we've improved the way that people are becoming more aware and discussing knowledge exchange and impact. And we started in SSCR1 with proposals that pretty much said, I'm going to do a journal paper and I will do the findings summary you tell us to do. And we've gone through to people, doing videos, but thinking through why they're doing videos. Engaging more, involving practitioners more in their research, dramas, putting on plays, putting on other engagement workshops. There's a lot more happening that wasn't happening 7 years ago. People are still doing journal papers and so forth, but there are. It's a bit more innovative out there. And it's possibly the case that having to make the case for REF or funders, we've just started to improve the way we record and track impact. So it might be the case that we were always having impact, it's just people know about it a bit more now and are trying to prove it. And we're trying to, within SSCR, engage with addressing some of the issues around the sector capacity and culture rather than just working on the researcher side. So we know there's a two-way issue, we need to cover both sides. So for us, there's lots to do yet, but there's been a vast improvement from where we were 7 years ago. I put in hasn't there because when I read some proposals, I think we haven't gone anywhere. But there has been progress, as I keep being told, and we should be celebrating the fact that we've moved from where we were, this whole sector, 7 years ago. And we're just going to put it out to you. So think back 7 years or 10, you know, however many you fancy. And how far do you think that you've changed the way that you're approaching knowledge exchange, the way you're approaching impact, and your awareness of it? So we're just going to get you to rank yourself. So stand up, again, sorry. If you're sort of 1, you think you've improved a lot. Oh no, I should do it the other way around, shouldn't I? So 1, if you haven't improved, there hasn't been progress. Not that that sounds like I'm blaming you, but if you think there's lots more progress to be made, stand up at 1. Okay. Stand up. Thank you. Stand up if you think round 5, we've made quite a bit of progress. You've made quite a bit of progress. There is lots more to do, but we should be marking the fact that we've had quite a bit of progress so far. Thank you. Stand up if you think we're at 10. We've just completely done we've made a huge amount of progress and there's just nothing more to be done. Somebody has to stand up on this. Okay. I am going to stop there, but we're going to open up to discussion and we're going to get you to just sort of get into 4s, so maybe the 2 in front of you and the 2 to your side, and ask you to discuss 2 things. How far has the way in which research knowledge is generated improved, and or how far has the way research knowledge is used improved? And then just think about in what way and why do you think that is? If you just get into 4s or groups.
10 minutes or so. Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin. I wonder who's in their little groups has come up with a really good example of a way in which research knowledge has been either generated or used to improve impact. Who's got a good example they can share? Nobody at all. That speaks volumes. Come on. There must have been somebody who must have been talking about an instance. Martin, thank you very much.
Towards the end of the discussion, we were talking about the difficulties that people have in filtering. There's actually quite often a lot of information out there. So we're talking about autistic people, and lots of things are being suggested to work for autistic people. But quite often people are taking decisions about what to invest in. Often it's families, of course, but need help. It's not the evidence isn't there. The trouble is there's too much evidence, and some of it is rubbish. We don't know what is rubbish evidence. So I think there are ways to improve that brokerage. There have been attempts to improve that brokerage role. We need that help in filtering the evidence, whoever we are.
So there has been some progress on that, you'd say, in 7 years, but a long way to go.
We said the Becky's here from local authority, one of the few remaining researchers in a local authority evidence context, but her job is to filter that. But her job is to do that filtering to help decisions made by commissioners, councillors, and whatever else. So, in some respects, that filtering role is disappearing very rapidly for some.
Did anybody else touch on that? The sheer volume?
Yeah,
Yes.
of research. Yes?
Yes, it was actually the very first point raised, which was that positive things have happened because of the internet, because it's now much easier to access information, but then you've got an overload, and it's how you then filter that and how you evaluate that. If you're at a very micro level, an individual, whether it's running a very small organisation or care as a care, how do you filter the plethora of knowledge that previously wasn't available?
And did I see a hand at the back saying you've been touching on this as well? No? Yes? Say so.
We said the same because when you get access, when you're accessing the information, you have that question in your mind, and how do you know that something in entitlement sort of resonates is going to actually be for you, the key, and also the quality of it, and how do you, we're talking about you with frontline practice, and you want someone to help you do your job, or go to see somebody and change how you go to intervene with somebody, potentially, and actually to get something, take time to look for something, and it'd be very academic and very policy-based, isn't going to help you, so people then give up.
And in the absence of the endangered species of local authority, who can do that?
What I'd say is we also touched on the fact that obviously not all information is written, and for us as social care researchers, there's an enormous emphasis on dissemination, which is actually contact directly with frontline practitioners, whether it's also workforce training managers and social work managers, and that's incredibly valuable because although it doesn't give them somebody necessarily as a toolkit to follow, those are offering very discursive forums where somebody who's a frontline practitioner can hear the presentation, but then say, well, how does that relate to me, and discuss it and debate it. But with the purse strings being tightened in local authorities, it's increasingly hard to get social work practitioners or social care practitioners released to come to free training. It's not even a cost other than the bus or the train fare, because time and staff are such a precious resource now. And there's more pressure on us to disseminate. We're much more set up to disseminate, and there are fewer people being released to engage with.
Okay, what else were you talking about? Give me another bit.
I was thinking that, one of the things is, one of the perspectives is to compare perhaps social care research with other forms of research. And generally in other forms of research, the researcher will look at something and they will be very, very careful about the degree to which the findings of this piece of research are generalizable. Where they're generalizable, where they're not generalizable. Now what I noticed, working across a number of fields, different fields of research, is that in social care, contextual, sociological contexts are extremely important in terms of the degree to which any findings can be generalized, can be scaled, etc. And that's something I think that government find it quite difficult to cope with. I used, apologies to my friend, an example a moment ago. If you come up with a surgical renal intervention in the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle, it is highly likely to work in Derriford Hospital in Perth. Nobody really queries that. It might not work among certain very particular population groups. Generally it works. So there's an assumption in there that you can generalize. Now social care is almost the opposite of that. And what we don't do, I think, well enough in social care research is to build in to our research proposals the degree to which this is likely to be generalizable and the way in which we're going to define those borders.
Okay, let me stop you there. We've got 5 minutes to go. So you were nodding. You were discussing that in your group?
Not so much in our group, just definitely agreeing.
Any other thoughts on that?
Not specifically, but we were discussing, no offense to anyone in the room by the way, but the skill set of researchers in the work that they do and trying to have an impact. And I was saying that I work for a company who has a fantastic public affairs team, and we have several universities who are clients and have sort of put forward certain pieces of research that they would like the government to consider, to sort of filter down into policy. And my team works with them to get this out there, and that's a full-time job in itself, just to communicate, to get it to the right select committees, to get it considered, and that would be difficult for any researcher on top of all the other demands.
Angie, you were making the point that when we were talking that a lot of research teams say, okay, well that's the end of our contract, job done, no follow through, no support from a team like that.
Yes, I was also going to say put it in your funding proposal and then you can build it in.
Put it in the proposal. John?
I think that's really important. I think that the SSCR is really good at this, but I think some other funders, there's a slight danger of not really meaning it when we say it. So there's a box about impact and dissemination, but the rule of thumb historically has been, well, as long as you put something in that box that's vaguely credible, you know, it will be okay because the proposal sinks or swims on earlier boxes on the form, not on that one. And I'd love it if several key funders said we're not funding that study because the methodology is great, but actually the implementation is really, really poor. And academics are very instrumental. I mean, after doing that a couple of times, you very quickly learn that you have to take that box as seriously as the methodology box, otherwise it would be no go. And I think SSCR has been really good at challenging back and helping and supporting. But actually, if funders more generally could say, you know, this is great academically, but it makes no sense in terms of impact, we're just not funding it. I do think behaviours would change.
I won't briefly on research, but we will always have to frame our research in several contexts in terms of stakeholders. And the research would not be regarded as complete when you handed it to you unless you stated how that research could be brought to different stakeholders. It was simply not company practice, was accepted. So, and you had to sort of like list the stakeholders, make a system of the stakeholders, how it would flow, and where it would start, where it would end, and how the research would be framed to each stakeholder, and how stakeholders could connect. Now, you weren't expected to actually go out and do it, but that was the complete job.
And to pick up David's point, do you think you should need to go as far as to say this is how it would work in Newcastle and this is how it might work differently in Plymouth?
Yeah, as David said, anything to do with social, it's like if you don't do social epidemiology, then your work, the value of your work, potential value, drops by at least 60% because it's not in that sort of context of social epidemiology.
Any further reflections before we do? Yes?
I think we need to keep having sessions like this because the question of impact, we're all on the journey still, and because of the differences between medical research and social care research, I just think this has really been really useful, and that we need to get conversations going.
We talked about sort of making sure that research is impactful by trying to understand the political environment as well. You know, and actually, research can make a real impact if it is commissioned at the right time and in the right context as well. You know, and having that link. Right, Patrick King's product. So I think that we really need that, constant communication between the research bodies, those that commission research, and people that are sort of in tune with political context as well, and try to sort of understand where we can make an impact and actually where we can't. Because if you're doing research into something, we talked about some of the NICE guidance, for instance. NICE guidance is fantastic. It's great research, synthesis of research into saying what does good look like. But actually, if the context is that local authorities have no ability to commission anything that looks like good, then why does it even matter? That's just my personal view. But sometimes it doesn't matter.
Obviously, like everything, it comes down to money and power. And one of the interesting things that came up very early on in our discussion, which is that if it was a different industry, if it was petrochemicals or something, there would be money coming up from the front line saying this is what we want, this would be useful for us. In social care, there's no money coming up from policymakers, civil servants higher up, who hold the purse strings, who commission us to do research. We desperately want them to read the bloody research and change their policies accordingly. And do they know they bloody well don't, but they hold the power. So, of course, if we were all doctors, maybe we would have more power to turn around to those policymakers and politicians and say, we hold you to account, you commissioned this evaluation, and you rolled out the bloody policy before we printed the result. Because actually, you were using us as a smokescreen to validate a policy that is political and has no other place.
Okay, I think this must be the final point.
Yeah, I think we just need to add into that we can pull up the university system as well, and it's been found rare, and that we're just coming out of that desperate need to produce papers. Where do you put your time? Do I need to publish a paper, or do I run that event to get my findings into practice? That's the kind of reality of it.
Angie, a final thought?
Do both.
Do both.
Sorry.
Both of those things she says. Make it clear in your submission at the beginning and why you're doing it. I think that was your message, wasn't it?
I think one of the things that has come up a lot is that it's difficult on either side, but there are ways that we could maybe try and do little things here and there, which hopefully overall in the system we should be able to progress a bit more and come back in 7 years and say we've done a lot more since the last 7 years.
Make it a date, 7 years' time. But we're going to keep talking, your suggestion, we'll have more of these sessions, I'm sure, in future. Can I ask you to be back in the next session promptly at 2:50, so there's a quick 15-minute refreshment break now. Thank you very much. Please thank Angie very warmly.